acids that make up our diet. The macronutrients are going to be the bigger things that make up our diet. So our macronutrients are going to be the protein, the fats, and the carbs. The big three. Whoa, I can spell. Carbs. Okay? So what I wanted to talk about a little bit today was basically how these different macronutrients work in our body, how much we should be having, what types are going to be the best choice, that type of stuff. Remember, this is interactive, so if you guys have questions, I'm not up here just preaching to you. I'd love to have a conversation about something if you have a question. But let's get into this a little bit. Proteins. We'll start with protein, right? We hear a lot about protein in here. Why? Protein is literally what makes up your muscle. So when you're coming in to work out, you're breaking down that muscle. It's incredibly important to make sure that after that workout, you're getting protein in to help rebuild that muscle, as well as you're getting protein throughout the day to continue to help build and basically maintain the muscle that you're building in here. When we eat protein, okay, basically our body will then break it down into what are called amino acids. Those are building blocks for our protein. Then it will release a hormone, or creates the release of a hormone that's called glucagon. You don't have to memorize this, but what I do want you to understand and know is what glucagon does. Glucagon is what signals and tells our body to basically mobilize and use our energy stores. So this can be fat stores, this can be energy that's stored in our muscle. This will make sense as we kind of get down and break into it a little bit. But I want you to understand, it's what basically tells us to mobilize our energy. So use our energy, okay? Super, super important if you're trying to lose body fat, right? Very important hormone. Fats, on the other hand, fats are what basically, when we eat those, they're going to break down into fatty acids, okay? How many of you guys have been reading that wellness guide that Tyrell sent out? Have you looked at it?
Yeah.
I looked over it multiple times because it's super power packed. It's great. I was looking at it today and Jared was like, I want that. Where did you get that? Send it to me. Nope, it's for special people. But in that wellness guide, if you go about 3 pages in, it kind of has this general, so what are we eating? What's on the diet? Right? And it talks about eating the healthy fats. Right? I want to talk about what maybe some of these healthy fats are, just a little bit. Just briefly, you guys heard of omega-3s, omega-6s? Okay? Those healthy fats are going to be those ones that are anti-inflammatory causing. We'll get into a little bit more about that, but just wanted to briefly touch on that. So when we eat fats, our body breaks down into fatty acids. This is going to release a big, long hormone, suicidal-kinase, CCK. That's the abbreviation of it. Okay? Basically, what its job is and what it does is it's what makes us feel satiated. That's what's going to make us feel full or make us feel happy with the food that we're eating. We feel content, right? So that's also a super, super important hormone, okay? Carbs, let's save carbs for last. Why? So many questions on carbs. American diet, primarily made up of carbohydrates. What are carbohydrates? Give me examples, guys. Bread, perfect. What else? What? Potatoes, awesome. What else? Sugar, yeah. All different types of carbohydrates. When we eat carbohydrates, our body's able to break those down into a form of energy called glucose. Okay, basically this is your body's form of sugar. Okay, your body likes to use that for energy because it is so easy and fast to break down. So it's very readily available. When this glucose hits your bloodstream, once it's been broken down, when it hits your bloodstream, okay, it can't stay there. So your body then releases a really powerful hormone called insulin. You guys have all heard of insulin? Pretty much everyone's heard of insulin, okay? What insulin's job is to basically signal and tell your body to store that energy, store that sugar, store that glucose, okay? I want you to understand how these work and how they work together because they all have a different part to play in our diet, okay? Insulin is signaling and telling our body to store energy, whereas protein is basically signaling and telling your body to use that stored energy, and fats are what's helping us feel content with our diet, feeling happy with what we're eating, feeling full so that we're not overeating. All have a really, really important part. Do you guys have questions on that and how that works? Okay. I want to get into carbohydrates a little bit more. We'll go back to these, but since we're on carbohydrates, let's talk about this and break this down a little bit. I'm super, super, super visual. I may have drawn this up for some of you guys. Maybe I even talked about it last year. But when I was kind of trying to visualize and learn about how your body stores these carbohydrates, I kind of came up with this mental visualization of 3 storage containers, okay? You basically eat these carbohydrates, it turns into glucose, you release that insulin, and now you have to store that energy. Where does it go, right? Does it immediately go as fat? Is there some other place to store it? This is all important to know because we need to eat carbohydrates. Is it always becoming fat? Do I not eat carbohydrates? I needed to understand this. So, basically there's 3 places that your body can store these carbohydrates, okay? We have your muscle, kind of a medium-sized container. Cool thing is you come in, you work out, you build more muscle, you build this container, you can make it bigger, okay? Second container, small container, your liver, right? Your liver basically is as big as it's going to be. It's small and it's not going to get much bigger than that, okay? Together, maybe sometimes you'll hear about these referred to as your glycogen stores. As coaches, maybe sometimes we throw that term around, okay? Your muscle and your liver, those are your glycogen stores. And basically, these are your body's first sources where it will go and look for energy, okay? Once that's full, or once those are depleted, then your body will start to tap into as big, infinitely as big as you want to make it, 3rd container of fat. So let's kind of talk about how this works. Where does your body go first? How do we determine where to store what? Okay? Let's say, for example, you have been asleep all night, right? You're basically in this fasting phase where your body's been working off of these energy stores. What it's going to do first is go to these muscle and go to these liver and take energy from there, okay? Once that energy is gone, then it will start to tap into these fat and start to take some of that energy from there. So when you wake up in the morning, you're in this state where your body's basically burning fat. Problem is, typically we'll wake up, have a really big, typical American, maybe a big bowl of cereal with some toast, with some orange juice, giant carbohydrate-filled diet, right? Major carb rush, so we're filling up this muscle, filling up this liver, maybe even putting a little bit there. Then what do? For lunch, we go to work. First off, we have a sedentary job, we're sitting at a desk, we're not moving too much. We drive to work, so we don't exercise getting there. And we sit down and have a big lunch full of pasta, baked potato, french fries, hamburger with french fries, right? Well, we pretty much have these full, so where is that going to be stored? Here, okay? Then we continue to sit at our desk, probably take a nap midway through the day when no one's looking, if we're being honest. And dinner, what do we eat for dinner? Probably more pasta, more white rice, baked potato, bread, something along those lines, right guys? But what happens if we haven't exercised and been sitting all day? These are full, these are full. We continue to add to this. Does that make sense, guys? So that's the big problem, is that majority of our diet is these carbohydrates. So we're releasing insulin, telling our body to store. We're not working out or using these stored energies, and that has to be stored somewhere. So it ends up, over time, being stored as fat. Okay? Let me kind of draw you a different scenario. Maybe something a little bit more like what we're used to or what we should be doing. Okay? Muscle container, liver container, fat container. Now we wake up in the morning, right? We have something that's a little bit better, more rounded. So maybe we wake up and have a couple eggs. We have some proteins that are telling us to use some of the energy. And then maybe we have a little bit of fruit or something with that. So we have an apple and some eggs, right? We're able to put some of that energy into our muscle, okay? Because we didn't eat as many carbohydrates, we're good. We're not using that fat. Then what do? Maybe we wake up and we come to a morning workout, right? So when we work out, our body has to get that energy from somewhere. Where does it come from? Our muscle. That's the first place that our body's going to go to. So you come in, you work out, you use up that energy. Post-workout, you're back to having empty boxes, clean slates, right? Which is why, and we'll spend, it's super important, so we'll spend a lot more time going over this in a later discussion. Post-workout food, how you should be eating, what you should be eating. But this is why after your workout, what you eat and getting food in is going to be super important, because at this point, your body has nothing, no energy at all whatsoever to fuel you for the rest of the day or to help it rebuild itself at that point. So it's really important we go get a meal in. At this time of day, because we're completely empty, usually we'll hear after a workout, that's a good time to maybe eat a slightly higher carbohydrate or more starchy, dense fruits, veggies, those types of things. Why? Because your body needs those carbohydrates at that time. How are you going to get through the rest of the day if you have zero energy to run off of? Does that make sense, guys? So maybe after our workout, we're going to get our protein in, because we know when we get our protein, then get a starchy carbohydrate to help kind of refuel us a little bit, maybe some sweet potatoes. Love my post-workout sweet potatoes. Okay? That's going to help us fill this up. Now, because we've worked out earlier, our body's working that whole rest of the day, metabolism sped up to help us recover. So what happens is even when we go to work and we're sitting at our desk, our body is actively using and pulling from these stores. So when we go to eat lunch, we're not going to be eating the big pasta, big potato lunches. We're eating more of our salads, getting our vegetables in, getting our meat. We're able to fuel and add some fuel to the fire, but if we're eating right, it never gets to this fat containing. Does that make sense? So that's where healthy diet and where exercise and kind of the timing and the know-how, which again is something that, because there's a lot to go into it, we'll talk about that a little bit later. Does that make sense, guys? Kind of gives you that visual. You have questions on that and how that works?
So when you wake up for an early workout,
Yes.
what does that look like? Basically empty?
Great question. It depends a little bit on, it's going to vary on individual depending on how or what they ate, maybe the night before, but yes. Typically, this is going to be fairly empty, which is why for a lot of people, if they wake up, don't eat breakfast, come in and try to do an early morning workout, usually they'll end up getting really nauseous or feel really sluggish. And it's because their body's basically trying to create energy out of nowhere. And so it will make you tired, it can make you feel really sick to your stomach and nauseous. Your body usually at that point is having to go and try to break down protein from somewhere to get energy. Not a happy body that has to do that.
So if they are empty, is it going to draw from fat stores or is it going to draw from the muscles?
Okay, so great question. I'm going to get into this just a little. I'll talk about this very briefly, and then when we talk about timing, I'll get into it more. But one thing I want you guys to remember is that for your body to be able to burn and use fat, you have to be able to have some kind of carbohydrate present. When you completely run out of carbohydrates, the only option that your body has at that point is to draw and use protein for energy. And where does protein usually come from?
Muscles.
More often than not, unless you're eating a very, very high protein diet, your body will then have to go to and break down that muscle. Which is why it's really important to make sure you're getting protein in your diet so that we're able to maintain that muscle that we're working to build. Does that kind of make sense?
This is finding that balance.
It is. It is definitely finding a balance. And so that's kind of the goal of today, is explaining this and then trying to figure out what that balance is going to be for you guys, giving you a starting point so you can kind of gauge off of that. Great question. I love it. Love the questions. Thanks, Viper. Cool. Any other questions about the storage container? Yes, sir. You have another one?
No, I was just bringing it up,
So good.
asking questions.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So I'm going to leave this kind of up here so you guys can kind of keep this visualization as we continue to talk about carbohydrates, right? We have our muscle, we have our liver, and our fat. Okay, so we kind of talked about how carbohydrates are stored. Let's get a little bit deeper into what carbohydrates are, because we kind of throw this out as a general term, but let's be honest, we know that not all carbohydrates are created equal, right? When I asked for examples of carbohydrates, we had anywhere from fruit to sugar, candy. Big difference between them, right? If you go back to basic health class, we learned there's 2 types of carbohydrates. Do you guys remember what those are?
Simple and complex.
Boom, J-Rod! Well, lead, right?
Yeah.
Education maybe a little better up there or something. Just kidding, guys. Sorry. Okay. So simple and complex. Okay? So J-Rod, since you're so smart, what's the difference? Do you remember the difference?
Just the length of the chain of the carbohydrate and how it breaks down and metabolizes in your body.
Perfect. So these simple carbohydrates are going to be, most of these are kind of the pre-processed carbohydrates. So when you go to the store, anything that's basically packaged, that's broken down. I went grocery shopping with a personal training client the other day. We went and looked at bread, so I could just show her, hey, this is bread and this is bread. Do they look anything alike? Not really. Some bread looks like cardboard. Other ones are packed full of seeds and wheat and this and that. There's a big difference. those processed cardboard-looking like breads have already been broken down so far to an extent that our body doesn't have to do much work to digest that, okay? Sugar, soda pop, sugary cereals, all of the above. Your body, when you eat that, is able to digest it very quickly, spits it out into that blood sugar very quickly, and creates this big spike in your blood sugar, okay? You get a big spike in blood sugar, guess what has to happen? Big spike in insulin, okay? The bigger your blood sugar spike, the more insulin that has to be released, and the more that you're signaling and tell your body, we gotta store this. Gotta store it somewhere. Where is it likely stored at this point if we're eating that? Hopefully here, but for most, fat container right here, okay? So that's why when you go back and look at that nutrition guide, it talks about foods to avoid, processed, simple sugars. That's why, okay? Complex carbohydrates, on the other hand, are basically our carbohydrates from nature. So they haven't been pre-processed for us. They are nutty and gritty and grainy. They have fiber, okay? So what happens, takes much longer for our body to digest them. Longer, lower, slower, blood sugar release, less overall insulin having to be released, okay? Which means, hopefully, we avoid storing it here. Sound good on that, guys? So,
Even after post-workout, you want to do complex after post, you want to do more simple.
great question. So, we are trying to get carbohydrates into our muscle post-workout. Typically, that's why when you hear about what great post-workout foods are, we talk about more of the starchier vegetables like sweet potatoes, maybe bananas, things like that that have more sugars to them, so that there is a little bit more insulin driving it into the muscle. The thing to also keep in mind, though, is that because your body is empty, it's desperately looking to try to get that nutrition in and will readily absorb it. So yes, you typically want to try to get starchier. That's when, I mean, to think about it, if you're going to be eating your grains, oatmeal or quinoa or rice or your sweet potatoes or your butternut squash, that's the time that we want to get it in. I've heard it before that people say, if you're going to eat those things, that's great, that's fine, but you got to earn them first with the workout. All right, cool. That's when you'll be able to eat those things, help fill up your muscle and avoid storing it as fat. So the timing of it definitely goes into play. That answer your question, Kim? Okay, cool.
Well, like some people do like top milk or something.
They do.
And I'm like, is that good? I don't know.
So you will hear a lot of that, and it actually goes back to kind of the sugar source a little bit. So one of the sugars or the sweeteners that's used in foods a lot is what's called high fructose corn syrup, right? They've actually found one of the problems with fructose in general, which is also the sugar found in fruit, is that your body can only store and process that food in your liver. Okay? Alcohol's the same way, by the way, guys. So this brings up a good point, because that is also on the list of foods to avoid, right? Can only be processed and stored in your liver. Here's the downside of that. Your liver's super small. It fills up really fast. Then it's shot over to fat. So a lot more of the studies that they're finding as they, look, why are we getting fatter and fatter and fatter? Well, we're using corn, and specifically, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup to sweeten a lot of our foods because it's cheap, right? The problem with that is now they've found, well, it's because it can only be stored in your liver. And then once that's full, it becomes fat. So very quickly, any of those sugary foods, alcohol, are going to end up being stored as fat. So that's why they are definitely foods to avoid. You look at things like chocolate milk or maybe like some of the candy or things, you say, oh, it worked out, now I can eat this. Well, guess what? A lot of those things are sweetened with high fructose corn syrup, and it's going to do nothing for rebuilding your muscle. So that's why typically fruit is not usually the best post-workout form of carbohydrate. You want something starchier. Bananas are a little bit different because they also have dextrose along with fructose in them.
I've been putting berries in my protein shake.
They're delicious. They have lots of micronutrients, but as far as giving you energy to rebuild muscle, yeah, not their strong suit. Good question. You guys understand that? Any questions about that? Beast, your eyes got big. I'm reading eyes. I've gotten to that point, okay? Okay. Good questions. You guys need examples of foods like after workouts, or are we good?
So half banana, you guys are going to do berries.
Yes.
let's go over a couple examples of
Yeah.
post-workout foods.
Cool. So we keep talking about the example of like sweet potatoes, right? They are a complex carb, tons and tons of micronutrients, very, very good for you. They're a great example of a post-workout food. If you're going to eat your grains, like we talked about, oatmeal, wild rice, quinoa, all whole grains, very healthy foods. Foods to be eaten in moderation. Those are great foods for after your workout to be eating. Other starchy vegetables that can work as well are going to be carrots, beets, those types of things. And if you do need to, especially if your goal is, this varies a little bit too depending on what your guys' goals are. And we are going to be, like I said, we're going over that. I think our next discussion is going to be depending on what your goals are, kind of how do we change how we eat. But for people that are trying to build muscle, it's definitely a lot more important that they're getting and storing more energy here, typically because they're working out a lot harder and differently. And that's when we'll get some of the things like dextrose, which is a really simple sugar, maltodextrin, or even just basically straight up sugar to be taken into the system to help build that muscle. If your goal is weight loss, it's better to stick to those whole foods.
Are those berries going to slow down the absorption? Would be better to just not put them in that.
No, yeah, you're fine. It will not slow down your
So I
absorption.
should have mailed them in then.
They have the fiber, but like I said, at that point, after your workout, your body is using it. It basically is opening up the gates to allow any kind of nutrition back into that muscle. Okay, they're called insulin receptors, but it's opening that up to allow any nutrition in. Does that help, guys?
How long after your workout should you eat?
Great question. So they basically, with protein, it's a little bit quicker. You want to force and get that in sooner. So they say you have about a 30-minute window after your workout, which is why protein shakes are so awesome, because truthfully, what's the reality that you're going to be able to get home, cook up some eggs, cook up a piece of chicken, and eat it within a 30-minute window? Not likely. Sometimes I try, but then I get home and I'm sweaty and I got to change out my clothes first, but then I don't want to put clean clothes on, so then I have to shower. Doesn't work, right? Protein shakes are an awesome way to go as far as that goes, okay? Plus, protein shakes are usually already in a form that they are able to be absorbed and utilized more quickly than like a piece of chicken. Your body would have to digest and do a little bit of work on that, okay? Carbohydrates, they say you typically have a little bit longer window within a couple of hours. My biggest recommendation though is when you get that protein in 30 minutes after, try to also get some form of carbohydrate within it at that point, and then have a meal within about an hour to 2 hours after the workout so that you are fully carving up. Does that make sense, guys? So like for example, we do our protein shake, we have our refuel, right? Scoop of refuel, scoop of protein, drink that post-workout, go home, shower, change, eat your meal, whatever that's going to be. At that point in time, since it's post-workout, that should be one of your highest carbohydrate meals of the day. So we choose from that healthy carbohydrate list, starchy veggies, whole grains, okay? That's when you have your carbohydrates. And then you're pretty much going to be good to go. You would have to watch. There's formulas to get a lot more specific on it, but in general, if you pay attention to how your energy levels are for the rest of the day, for the next workout, for the workout the next day, you can kind of gauge plus or minus and know that you're getting enough fuel or not enough fuel, if that makes sense.
Is whey dairy?
It is, yeah. Whey is a dairy, casein is a dairy, yes. We could get really specific in that because there's different types of proteins that they use that have different breakdown rates, but we don't really need to worry about that for the purpose of this right this second. Sound good?
I was just curious.
Yeah, no, it is a dairy.
It
Whey is a dairy, yeah.
is.
It is, but they, in most cases with whey, they actually will add enzymes. They'll add lactase to counter the lactose and kind of filter out a lot of that dairy. So it's not going to be the same as like drinking a glass of milk or something, for example. Cool. Good questions, guys. All right, we're good to move on?
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Because I work out at night, so I don't get done until 7. So if I'm eating my carbs and all that at night, isn't that gonna?
Great question. Let's go back to the blocks. I'm actually glad you brought that up because there are those people that fall into the eating categories, right? You wake up in the morning, you've got empty containers, basically, or pretty empty containers, so you can eat, a balanced breakfast, good carbohydrates, proteins, those healthy fats, okay? So we can kind of work through the day on eating that healthy food to fill these up. You want to make sure probably before your workout that you're at least, your lunch or whatever is going to have some carbohydrate in it so that you have energy before your workout. Now, same thing, you come in, you work out, you work your guts out because Terrell is an awesome workout. Empty those containers, you get done post-workout and it's night, but you're looking empty like this, okay? At that point in time, same rules are going to apply. You need to get those protein and those carbs in so that your body can refuel. Otherwise, what happens? You go to bed, you have nothing to rebuild, and your body spends the whole night basically breaking itself down, trying to use that protein to get that energy to refuel those processes. And then you kind of try to come in the next day to work out and have no energy, right? Because there's no energy there to begin with. Does that make sense? So same rule will apply. 30 minutes, get that protein in. So maybe like right here after your workout, drink your protein shake, drink your refuel. Go home, have a meal, some sweet potato, and piece of chicken about the size of your palm, right? And you're good. Go to bed. Great question.
Can you show her how that's going to store in there after she works out, even though it's late at night and people have heard, hey, don't eat your carbohydrates late at night? Can you show her how it'll get stored then?
Yeah. So you've got empty basically right here, okay? When you eat, basically you should just be filling that up. We're staying away from here. Now when you go to bed at night, your body's continuing to work and build those processes. It's drawing from these, okay? So the same thing happens. Basically, you wake up in the morning and you're back to where everybody else is, empty containers, okay? What makes the difference though, guys, is making smart food choices, which is really what the whole focus of this transformation is about. Because the food choices that you're going to make are going to determine if you're eating way too many carbohydrates and eating the wrong types, then yeah, you are going to be storing fat at night.
So Rochelle, if you're doing a good job keeping those first two boxes full and then being full, whatever, when do you start drawing from the fat to burn fat?
Good
I
question.
mean, if you're eating
So-
right and you're keeping your carbs right,
Yes, your body will always, like I was saying before, okay, there's kind of this old saying that fat burns in a carbohydrate flame, okay? So you have to have some carbohydrate present to burn and utilize that fat. So anytime that you're working out or going through your day, your body is drawing a certain amount from this fat container, okay? You used to tell us like it's when your heart rate is actually lower, that's typically when your body will burn and utilize fat. So when you're working out at a really high heart rate in here, we're doing, Tabata drills, or we're doing something for time and we're going all out, most of that energy will be drawn from here. You will be drawing a little bit from there. Typically what happens is it's after your workout, once your heart rate slows back down, okay, that your body continues to draw energy from here as it's trying to rebuild and kind of recoup, that it's pulling from those fat stores for energy. Does that make sense?
Is that your elevated metabolism for, like with the big lifts, like deadlifts, squats,
Yes.
multi-joint,
Yes.
24 to 36 hours or something like that, that your metabolism is
Right.
increased?
So what Tyrell's talking about is when you come in and you work big muscle groups, right? Basically, big exercises like your deadlifts, your cleans, they involve a lot of different muscles, so you create damage to a lot of square area on your body. Well, that takes your body a lot of time and energy to try to rebuild back up. So once you're done with your workout and you've gotten your heart rate down to a lower normal heart rate, okay, what Tyrell's talking about is, it's actually called EPOC, excess post-oxygen consumption. And all that really means is a fancy way of saying, you worked really hard. Now, your metabolism is going to be elevated, or like he was saying, in some cases they've done studies where it's actually up for 24 to 48 hours, depending on the type of workout you're doing and what you worked, where your body's having to work overtime to rebuild this, to get your body back to what it considers a normal level, okay? And in that process, once that heart rate is down, once your workout is down, that's when your body really starts to tap into here to use energy to go through its normal processes. Okay?
Is that why it's so, we're so quick to put on fat when we're filling up our muscle and liver glycogen stores, and that's why it takes a lot longer to take it off because of that process? Does that kind of
Yeah, I
describe
think what
what's going
you're
on?
saying is when you're trying to build muscle, it's just like anything else, it's kind of walking this fine line of giving your body enough energy so that it has it for that workout, and typically you will end up putting on a little bit of that becomes harder to pull fat off of your body because, again, you're walking this really fine line of trying to empty these out and having some of this and still being able to pull from some of that. That's basically what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and when you're losing fat at a healthy rate, it's going to be slower than how fast you can put it on. That's why if you're doing this healthy, it's going to take a while because everything has to stay balanced while you're working out, right?
Yeah, because if you cut your calories too fast, right, what actually happens is when you cut your calories too fast, your body senses, I like to think of it this way, okay? I think to think of your body as almost like a business, right? If a business is not getting the funds or the money in that it needs to run this business, what does the business usually end up doing? Makes cutbacks, maybe makes as many cutbacks as it can until it finally just has to close its doors, right? Well, your body operates the same way. Let's say, for example, that your metabolism, you require 2,000 calories a day, okay? But you decide, oh, cool, I'm going to lose some fat. I'm going to, go on this diet. I'm going to cut my calories down. I'm going to lose 10 pounds by the end of the week. It's going to be awesome. Okay, so I'm just going to cut my calories down to 1,000 calories. I'll cut it in half. Okay, well, here's the problem with that. Your body needs 2,000 just to go throughout its day. Okay, maybe that's not even including if you decide to come in and work out, and then you need more calories on top of that depending on what your workout was. Right, but you're only giving it 1,000. It can't get by on that, so it's really smart. It's going to look at the situation and say, okay, what can I do to get by on this 1,000 calories? What cutbacks can I make? Okay, we call this down-regulating. Basically what it ends up doing, it slows your metabolism, so it'll slow your metabolic needs so that you don't require as many calories. And usually it'll do this by going and attacking your muscle. Your body thinks, oh, here's a great idea. I'll go and use some of that muscle for energy, break that down into protein and amino acids. That'll make up my energy difference. I can get my extra 1,000 calories from that muscle, and at the same time, because I just burnt that muscle, our energy needs are lower. Now because I use that muscle, I only need 1,400 calories a day. Great. Not so great, right? Because what happens when you decide to go off your 1,000 calorie diet and want to go back to normal? And before, when you had a 2,000 calorie, metabolism that you were needing every day, because you dropped all those calories so fast and your body's had to burn and use that protein, okay, you worked your way down to now only burning and utilizing 1,000 calories in your metabolism every day. Well, that's crappy. That's why when you see a lot of people that do some of these extreme diets where they're not just eating in moderation, right, and they'll lose a lot of weight and they'll lose it fast, but then they go off of that, and then they end up putting that weight on, plus usually some. This is why. Okay, what you've actually done is you've downregulated or lowered your metabolism. And so it is this fine line of, basically it goes back to the basics, guys. Eat good food, right? We talk about what are we supposed to be eating. Vegetables, unlimited green vegetables, some starchy vegetables, eat quality protein. Fats, eat your healthy fats, about the size of your thumb. Eat frequently throughout the day, probably about 4 to 5 times a day. And work out. That's it. On average, they say 30 minutes a day.
I'm practicing the mindful eating because I'm a shoveler.
Yeah.
So okay, sit down.
Can we do the exercise in the middle here? What the thing we're going to work on? And what is that called?
Yeah, so what I want to do, since we're kind of talking about this, we're talking about balancing this fine line, all right? And it's hard to know, because we are all different, we're all unique, we all come from different genetic backgrounds, where exactly do we start you? How much carbs, how much proteins, how much fats do you need, right? So what I actually brought in, we're going to do this together as a group, and I have the PDF, we'll throw it on the blog so people can try this at home. Basically what it is called the metabolic typing test, and it was developed by William Wilcott, who he's basically known as the father of metabolic typing. He's got 40 plus years of research on developing it. So he actually came up with a really simple test to determine if you're a carbohydrate, a protein, or a mixed type individual. And based off that, it gives you a lot of, kind of outline on how much carbs, proteins, and fats you should be eating, and sort of how to eat them, a little bit on the timing as well. So we kind of left off when we were talking about carbohydrates. We took a little break to discuss ratios and how much we should be eating of what. I want to go back to this This is just kind of a little tidbit. This idea, I don't know, maybe because I'm kind of that science brain and it always drove me crazy, because I always wanted exact values. Like, okay, great, I want to eat complex carbs. What's more complex, an apple or banana? Sourdough versus whole wheat bread. Like, what's better? What's more? And so that concept always drove me crazy. So have you guys ever heard of the glycemic index? Super, super, super awesome system. Basically what the glycemic index is it was developed in Canada, and they take a large number of people into the lab, okay, take their blood sugar levels, and they basically feed them a certain food and then measure that again. So they're measuring your insulin response to certain foods. Based off that, they'll take the average from this giant group and assign it a number. So it's a really good way for us to know, okay, when we eat this, this is how it will affect our blood sugar, okay? Keep in mind this only relates to carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are the only food that break down into sugar, okay? So the glycemic index, basically what it is, erase this. Erase those two. Basically what the glycemic index is a scale from 0 to 100, okay? Anything from 30 down to 0 is what's considered low glycemic. Easy to remember, because low glycemic foods are going to be those low spiking blood sugars, okay? Anything 70 and above is what's considered high glycemic. So again, high spiking blood sugar, okay? And then you're going to get a lot of foods that are right here in this mid-range, those mid-glycemic. So the foods that we're supposed to be eating really fit into this. When you look at your leafy greens, some of your fruits like your apples, your berries, those types of things are all going to fit into this low glycemic category. Those are the foods that we've basically been given the green light on. If you go back and read your guides, it says, these are our priority, this is what we want to focus on. These mid-glycemic, these are the ones that we talk about eating sparingly. So these are going to be your whole grains, breads, rice, oatmeal, starchy vegetables, so our squash, sweet potatoes, okay? These high glycemic are going to be more of those processed type foods, or some of our really sugary fruits, like watermelon and pineapple tend to be a little bit higher glycemic. Bananas. Keep in mind too, the more ripe that fruits are, the more sugar they have, therefore making them a little bit higher glycemic. I love bananas, but I really kind of like pretty much green bananas, so green light for me, yay, eat them green. Just kidding. Do you have questions on that, guys? Does that make sense? Okay? Because this gets a little bit more complicated. How often do we eat a meal where we eat just a carbohydrate? Well, we shouldn't be. One type of food, no other ingredient, maybe just an apple. Maybe for a snack, but it doesn't happen very often. Usually, you know, we've got a plate that's composed of, maybe we have our piece of chicken, right? Palm-sized piece of chicken. We have some leafy greens, right? And then maybe we have our sweet potato, okay? That looks like a really good, healthy plate right there, okay? Well, here's the deal. Leafy greens are going to be really low glycemic. They're probably going to be really close to 0. We'll say 5, okay? What's the glycemic index of this piece of chicken? You guys know? Have an idea?
Not very much.
It's kind of a trick question.
It's
Why?
not on the
Because proteins do not break down into sugar. This only pertains to carbohydrates. Boom. Okay? So 0. Tricked you all. Okay? And then the sweet potato is going to be a little bit higher, so maybe we're looking at like 50. Okay? Well, we eat this all up, we chew it all up, all has to be digested, all goes to our stomach as basically one food, right? So what happens is our body basically take an average of this. This is what's called the glycemic load, right? It's important to understand because you can get smart about what you're eating with what to help control those blood sugar levels, to help control how foods are stored, how energy is used. So basically, we take the average of this and we're looking at, I don't know, like, what is that, like 20, we'll say. Okay? So that looks like a really good plate. Okay? Maybe even we just have a certain other type of food. Maybe we end up eating a bowl of ice cream. Okay? We have our ice cream in there, and there's like 20 ingredients in our bowl of ice cream, and like 5 different types of sugar. It's obviously going to be high glycemic, but what I want you to get thinking about is a lot of times our foods have multiple ingredients in one food that are all going to affect that blood sugar level too. So important to look at that. One thing that I want to point out with this glycemic,
Fats are like they slow.
they are 0 as well. So remember, zero or very close to zero. So that's why when you're planning or putting together a meal, it's really important to make sure that you're balancing out. If we go back to this, we already learned protein tells us to use our energy storages, while carbs tell us to store them. Well, if we eat those in better ratio, guess what? We're going to be using and storing it close to the same rate, and we're not going to end up storing it as fat. Does that make sense? If we're eating those right types of carbohydrates and we're not getting a ton of insulin. So when you're putting together a plate like this, you know, if you're eating a fat or a healthy protein, healthy fat or healthy protein with your carbohydrates, you can help moderate that blood sugar level so that now you're not getting this huge spike in your blood sugar with tons of insulin being released, which then is just building up in this big giant fat container. Does that make sense? It's important to think about that because the more that your blood sugar is spiked, the more insulin that your body will have to release to get it to be stored somewhere, the more likely you are that that's going to be stored as fat. So we're trying to keep those blood sugar levels low to basically avoid that. Is that making sense, guys? Okay. Awesome. No questions on that then, on the idea of the glycemic index? There's a really great book that I would definitely highly recommend if you're interested in it. I recommend it to all of my PT clients because it really, carbohydrates are primarily what makes up the American diet. So if you can understand like what types of carbohydrates are better to eat, when to eat them, what to combine them with, even how to cook them, believe it or not, it gets as specific as how you cook them to control your blood sugar levels, you're going to be way ahead of the game. But really great book, it's called The New Glucose Revolution, and I'll write it up on the board if those guys at home. New Glucose Revolution. And it also has a big table in it that basically has different, will tell you like apple, 20, banana, 65, oatmeal, 70. Does that make sense? If you're interested, you can actually pull these up online. We can try to see if we can find a good guide or something, but I've been able to find really pretty good printable glycemic index guides online as well. Okay? Sound good on that? So at this point, I just kind of want to wrap it all up, give us a good overview, because we kind of tapped on the proteins. We talked about the quality of proteins a little bit last time, making sure ideally that they're grass-fed, organic, or local, so that we're not getting a lot of the pesticides in them. We talked a little bit about serving size. If you read through that nutrition guide, it talks about for females, it's going to be cooked, it's the size of your palm. For guys, it should be about 2 times the size of their palms, so 2 palms. Or, since we're logging this on MyFitnessPal, you can get way more into it by setting up those ratios and logging it that way. But that's a really good general guide. Questions on proteins, on what we should be eating? Okay. Fats, right? We talk about fats and what's going to help us feel satiated, those healthy fats. Basically, there's 2 types. And I kind of mentioned this just real quick, briefly. If you go back through that nutrition guide, again, it's going to talk about these. But you'll hear a lot of omega-3s or omega-6s. And what we're trying to focus on in the diet is the omega-3s. Why? Because these are natural anti-inflammatories. So, examples of these omega-3s, right, are going to be our fish oil, the krill oil, like we sell here, those natural anti-inflammatories. Usually nuts are pretty good, have a little bit of a mix of both, but walnuts especially are higher in omega-3s, avocados, olive oil, avocado oil, right? Omega-6s are the ones that we want to try to moderate or stay away from as much as possible. And these typically are anywhere from 6 to 8 in the American diet. Typical American diet general, as long as you're eating raw nuts, that's a good place to go where it's a pretty good balance. I would really focus on staying away from more of your processed oils and fats.
That partially hydrogenated anything, if you see that,
Boom.
those stay away from
Trans
those.
fatty acids, boom. Trying to think of what else. I'll see like safflower oil quite a bit and stuff. That's omega-6, and canola oil, obviously, and vegetable oil.
Probably grain-fed beef. I mean, if it's not grass-fed or
Right.
chickens that aren't free-ranging and eating grass.
Animals that are eating grass-fed, they've actually found, whether it's dairy, eggs, meat, are naturally higher in omega-3s, whereas corn-fed or, yeah.
I didn't know
grain-fed.
that chickens ate so much grass until I got them. That they pretty much spend their whole day grazing that grass. I don't think about it, but it's grass all day. And that's the only reason I think.
Does that make sense on the fats, guys, as far as what we're doing? So kind of round up on fats, and then carbohydrates we talked about, right? What are green light? I like to think I'm super good at those, so green lights work. Green lights, all the leafy greens that you want, and as well as
I
basically.
don't want any roach in the green veggies.
Just in the bathtub. If you're cold, just limit
Do
to
not
that.
crave leafy greens, put it that way.
Okay, so basically our green light, as far as a takeaway from the diet today, leafy greens, green vegetables, all you want to eat. We're looking at eating high quality proteins.
So how many times can you take that supplement, that green supplement a day? Because I don't get a lot of greens this time of year. In summertime, I get a lot more.
I've never heard a limit on it, but how much are you taking?
Well, it's a 2 scoops, I think, but
2 scoops is a serving
it's
size.
better than what I do.
How many servings?
So
Once.
just once.
Yeah, I just take 2 servings once a day, but you can, yeah, I just usually make like a protein smoothie deal with it and then throw those in there. But I'm also eating other greens to help supplement that, which you should do. If you guys have a hard time eating greens, so besides throwing the greens in there, you can also throw like handfuls of spinach, and I swear, like blend it in a smoothie, you really can't taste it. Throw it in with some fruit and you're good to go. On our recipes this week, I actually threw in kind of some 101 in recipes for healthy green smoothies. Tons of recipes in there to try. There's a lot of different things that you can do. So I'm going to try a couple of them really good. So that's kind of our green light, right? Our yellow light, our eat in moderation. Those are going to be the starchy vegetables, as well as our grains. What else am I forgetting? Leaving out. That's about it. The major one I want you to focus on, the no-nos, the red light, right? Alcohol, processed, basically sugar of any kind, processed or otherwise, is what we're trying to avoid. Get something else.
Grains,
And
for the most part.